I don't have free range eggs, but I will gladly tell you where to find them if that's what you prefer to buy. But if you want to buy our eggs, I can tell you a list of stores locally. Or if you're looking, we get a lot of calls for quail eggs. Like that's one thing that's monthly. Someone's calling for quail or duck eggs. That really changed throughout COVID. And I think people are just becoming more aware of where their food comes from and those processes.
I'm Christina Kohler, an egg processing manager living in Syracuse, New York, and you are listening to the Vance Crowe Podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you're here. Well, today we're revisiting some of the old coronavirus podcasts that I used to do with a level of urgency. My good friend and a member of the Articulate Ventures Network, Christina Kohler, who came on during coronavirus to talk about how there weren't workers, there were a ton of pressure, they didn't have enough cartons to be able to produce eggs and get them into the city during the pandemic. She is back to talk about some of the big problems that are going on with New York State farming, which is that all of these essential workers, people that we were begging to go to work, we were waving flags in their honor saying how important they were. Well, when it comes time to allocate the vaccines, she is saying they've been told again and again that they're going to prioritize farm workers, and they have not. So Christina and I go through a description of this and what's going on and why this is such a big deal. And then, because Christina is so much fun to talk with, we talk about her views on why it is that young people have such kind of luxury beliefs about the way our food is produced. We have a pretty good conversation about decorating eggs for Easter, and I get to tell about the way that I think they should be boiled. And we have a really good conversation, and I'm so glad that Christina is a part of the network. She is one of the people that makes that place a rich and interesting place to dive deep on ideas, to explore things, to practice, to talk about things you're proud of. One of the things that I'm working about in the network and that members get access to first is I am actually finally, after many years, putting together a negotiations class online. I am taking years and years of experience and knowledge and training, and I am putting together a class that is somewhere in that spot between really general theoretical knowledge and those really tight, specific skills that people use when they're trying to become a negotiator that oftentimes feel out of place, disjointed, or even manipulative. So I want to be right in the middle, in between those spots, where I'm teaching you about how to think about what it is that you want, how to understand and get somebody else to talk about what they want so that you can give it to them, and they're more than happy then to give you what you need and want. And I talk about how to deal with impasses and problems. People in the network are a part of my beta tester group, so they get to actually see me working out some of these ideas that you can't find in any books and aren't done in any sorts of classes. These are original works and combined with theoretical knowledge that I learned in school. And so if you want to be a part of the group that tests this information, then I would love for you to join AVN. And if you'd like to be a person that just takes the class when it's produced, then you should go to my website, vancecrowe.com/podcast, and sign up for the newsletter where you'll be informed about classes that are coming out. I'm producing more and more every day about how to be a better communicator, and we'd love to have you. So feel free to join the Articulate Ventures Network by going to network.articulate.ventures. And if you'd like to just learn about the class, go to vancecrowe.com/podcast to learn more. All right, we're going to go on to the interview with my good friend, Christina Kohler. Christina Kohler, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Vance. Thanks for having me on today to talk about this really important issue.
Yeah, so you and I had you on the podcast when coronavirus was in full effect, and in a lot of ways, for many people, coronavirus has become, something they've adapted to, something they've kind of gotten along with. And you were telling me the other day about this is not true in agriculture, specifically in New York. There are big problems. And I remember when you were telling me this, I was kind of like, how big of a deal could it be? And you were like, no, Vance, this is really serious. So once you explained it to me, I was like, well, let's get her on the podcast and let's talk about it. So what is going on in the state of New York with farmers?
So farmers and farm workers are not being prioritized to have access to the vaccine. So currently we're in the 1B list. of those who are able to receive the vaccine. And on the federal list, farm workers are on that essential 1B list. In the state of New York, farm workers are not on that 1B list. That means that, you know, it's a job that's done 365 days a year, 24/7. As much as your listeners who are involved with ag, they know this. But it's starting to cause an issue for morale for those employees who have been showing up regularly as an essential employee. You know, they're doing the best that they can with PPE and, you know, sanitation. You know, we obviously are held to a high standard regardless because we're working with food, but there's only, you know, so much mask wearing, washing of hands, social distancing that farm workers can do before it just gets aggravating that other people have access and you've been told you're essential and you have to show up, and you have friends who are working from home remotely who are in healthcare, you know, not interacting with the public, and they've already received the vaccine because they're in healthcare.
Yeah, it's been astounding to me because when all of this was going on with coronavirus and I was doing these episodes sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, one of the things that became abundantly clear to everyone is we need to keep the people in our food system going. We need to make sure whatever it takes to keep the pork plants up, to keep people going in and milking cows, in your case with eggs. But all of that requires people to show up and do the work. And those people didn't get the option that other people did to, like you were saying, work from home. And so what is going on? Why in the world of all the people that New York State could vaccinate were these not at the very top of the list?
So when the original, like the rough draft list came out, we were told at New York Farm Bureau that farm workers will be on the 1B list, and we rolled it out in our daily coronavirus email to all of our members. And, you know, people were excited. Obviously, it's a choice. Like, I'm not going to tell you need to get it or not. Like, I want that to be my employee's choice, but I want them to have that option. And then when the official list was announced, their farm workers weren't on that list, and which started a big stir because here, you know, we've funded, you know, or provided food to Nourish New York, the food banks, milk drives, giveaways, to keep, you know, food on the shelf in the grocery store while doing what's best to keep our employees safe. And at first it was like, okay, in 2 weeks, you'll be added onto the list. So this was like around January 11th. It's now March 17th, and more people have been added to those lists of who's eligible, and each time farm workers have not been added. And, you know, we've been in touch with our county executive here. I've lobbied at the state level and the federal level, and our Senate Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, when I brought up this issue of farm workers and vaccines, she said, "You're already receiving them. Why are you bringing this up to me?" And I said, that's where you're misinformed, because we're not receiving them. We're not eligible. And there's a list of issues that are going to come up when we are eligible that we need to be discussing. And
like what? What are the issues about that?
So one of the unique, and I don't think it's unique just to New York, but I'm not sure that people are aware of, is half of our farm workers, 25,000 farm workers, are migrant farm workers. So seasonally, we have access to, in some industries, the H-2A program, like for apples, you know, fruits, vegetables, but that's not an option available to like the dairy farmers or egg farmers. So we have 25,000 farm workers who are migrant workers that have either language barriers. They might live in housing that is shared living spaces, or they're relying on pooled transportation because they don't have personal access to transportation. So with the vaccines, needing to be refrigerated. Like we don't have like a mobile unit that could come out and go to farms and reach these rural areas. In addition to just, even if you were able to sign up, we have rural broadband issues here in New York where that's been highlighted throughout the process, but it's really been amplified. So their ability to sign up to receive the vaccine. And so they are really just a vulnerable population that will be missed, even if we follow like the guidelines, just because of who they are.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? When the vaccines were all coming out, I was like, I wonder how they'll prioritize this. And then what you find out is people can go they get in order. And then at the end of the day, if they have leftover vaccines, then they've got to use those that day because whichever ones have been taken out of the fridge. So for the people that are highly networked, highly mobile, and able to get to places, they don't have to worry about their employers or having enough money or having the cars to get around. There's a big population of people that get to fast track and jump ahead, but you don't think about, well, what happens if you don't go get the people that are not highly networked, that aren't mobile? And these are the people that we asked to go face danger when we had no idea what was going on with coronavirus. When we literally were watching videos of dead bodies being left in the streets, we were like, it's so important that you come in and work so that people get fed in the cities. And now to say, well, we're just going to wait on getting them access, it feels like, spitting on the very thing that we asked them to be honorable about in the first place.
Yeah, and they want it. They've asked like, are we eligible? And it's disheartening to have said like in January, like, we're going to be on the next list, and then you let them down. And like, you want to have that level of trust and open line of communication with your employees, and you don't want to like give them false hope. Like I've been able to get the first dose because I'm overweight, but that's not an option for everyone. And so anything to get the word out is.
Yeah. So how did you become the person that became the spokesperson for this? I know you've been doing radio interviews. You've been getting out and doing this. How in the world did you become the face of trying to get the vaccines for workers?
So through my role as the Young Farmer and Rancher Chair for New York Farm Bureau, I've had like connections and networking. Actually, the first podcast that I did with you kind of put me on a trajectory that my name was a little bit more like, not that I wasn't known prior, but like just like statewide. And then also as second year as chair, you're just building upon those relationships that you've built, naturally throughout, since I was in college. Even before that, I was actively involved in Farm Bureau, but it's an important issue. We've had the labor issue here in New York with the 60-hour threshold, and they would like to reduce that to 40 hours.
Whoa, just slow that down. Tell me all about that.
So prior to COVID starting, we had a new set of labor laws here in New York. Prior to that 60-hour threshold, if you were in ag and you worked 80 hours a week, you were just paid your regular wage, whatever you agreed to at the time of your hiring or your last, raise or whatnot. And so they made a decision, they being the legislative body, that they were going to change it to 60 hours. And then they created a wage labor board made up of 3 people to figure out how they were going to proceed next. So if it was going to be like a natural step down, if we were going to go from 60 to 40, hold at 60. I mean, hold at 60 is what we would like as farmers, Farm Bureau.
And so does this mean that they can only work 60 hours, or after 60 hours, it changes their wage rate?
So after 60 hours, it's time and a half. If you work on your day of rest, your designated day of rest, regardless if you're at 60 hours or not, it's time and a half. So say, it rained and you couldn't do what you were supposed to do that day, be it harvest or, fertilize something. So you had to do it the next day. And that happened. So say that was happened on Saturday, it rained, but Sunday is your designated day of rest. Say you had 38 hours for that week and you're working on your day off, it's time and a half, regardless if you're at 60 or not. So now you're not only are you juggling schedules of the 60-hour threshold, because we have small margins and commodities, but now if you're asking someone to come in, even though they want to work, like they could say, I know it's my day of rest, but I would like to work and have the hours. It's still time and a half on their designated day off.
And as a business, if you end up spending too much on labor that you don't make money on the profit of the sale of the things that you're trying to put out there, eggs in your case, then all of a sudden nobody works, right? Because you're not a profitable business.
Right. And I think sometimes people look at farms and they see land, they see infrastructure, and they see equipment, and they think farmers are rich. And I even find that in other areas of ag, with my new role on the Syracuse Onondaga Food Systems Alliance Advisory Board, working with Syracuse University students, urban agriculture, community gardens. When I'm sitting in these discussions, having these conversations, I've heard you make money when you send your eggs out of the area to New York City, and that's why you don't keep them locally. And normally when we move eggs to New York City, it's because we have a surplus. We don't have the room to store them on site to hold them till maybe the market goes up a little bit, and because eggs have a nice shelf life. So we move them to the city at a loss. And so to be at these tables and be able to share that part of the story, that it's not always, sunshine and rainbows. And there are days where it's you don't want to send your eggs for 40 cents a dozen to New York City, but at least you have the cooler space. That's a last resort. I mean, the market right now is high or higher. So, but it's sad that it takes a pandemic to have food prices that are fair for the consumer, fair for the farmer, and so that we can keep our operation running.
It's really interesting to me, and I think about the interview I did with a guy named Rob Henderson, who was the one that pointed out this concept of luxury beliefs, right? So if you're sitting at a university, you're at the top of the world, right? You're in the wealthiest country in the nation. You've got access to any information that you would want. You can go connect with anybody that you want. That they're able to hold beliefs about how the world works, and that may not be accurate. And in the past, maybe that didn't matter, but those are the people that are then informing, they're voting, they're pushing their ideologies or their way of thinking into the world. And suddenly you then have somebody come along and say, we're going to change the free market and we're going to decide on things like wages, not realizing that if you can't pay somebody for working over 60 hours, if it becomes now 50% more expensive, it's not like you can turn around and just find more labor and go hire more people. You're now turning people down that want those hours. And you're also looking around and saying, well, there's already a shortage of workers. And this is what are we supposed to do here?
Yeah. And that's what's happening. And you see more consolidation of farms, even families just, taking their dairies, and it might be 4 families that operate a larger operation to share resources and, employees, tractors, to make that happen. And I think when you step back and say I'm studying food at a university, that's a real luxury to be discussing how it's grown, how it's processed, how it ends up on your table, and where you might not have even spent a day on a farm in your life. And everyone needs to eat. Food insecurity is real, but I would gladly offer anyone the opportunity to work a full day on a farm.
Yeah, I mean, one of the philosophical ideas called Hume's guillotine is one of these things that I wish I had known when I was in college, because I am certain that I had a ton of luxury beliefs about the way the world ought to be. So Hume's guillotine describes the idea of is versus ought. It's one thing that for you to be able to use like science or observations to discover what is true, but what is true doesn't tell us anything about the way things ought to be. So, and when you're in college, I think that what we, instead of teaching many people about the hard sciences, what is true, what do we know to be factual, instead, a lot of young people are going to school and they're being taught a lot of oughts about the way the world ought to look and ought to work. And without actually having a functional knowledge of what is, you're completely divorced from reality. And you can go around and if you are operating in that world, you are a danger to everyone around you because your oughts are received wisdom. Somebody else imparted that on you.
And I think you see that in the cage-free versus caged discussion in Animal Humane. And
talk about that. So what is actually cage-free? To explain that for people that don't know it very well.
So we have, chickens in cages. We have chickens in enriched cages. We have free-range chickens. And then we have cage-free chickens. And it can be confusing to the consumer what that means. So like on our farm, we have cages and we have enriched cages. And those enriched cages just mean they have more room to move around. And cage-free means they're still in a barn, sometimes hundreds of thousands of chickens in one barn. And then we have...
Do you mean that literally hundreds of thousands of chickens in one barn?
Yeah, I mean that literally. Yeah.
Wow.
Like
okay.
if you look into like some of the cage-free operations in the US, in Arizona, and around the country, yeah, they've got millions of birds on site with multiple barns, and they are still in barns. It's not like, free range is what you would think of like out on pasture, in the grass, hanging out maybe with some guardian dogs protecting them. And I have a favorite free range farm I like to follow out in California, Wise Acres. She has an egg vending machine. I think she's totally rad, Tiffany. And but it's a lot of hands-on work. But she's able to like sell her eggs, I think, in an egg vending machine for like $8 a dozen. And she posts her flock on Instagram, and you can see them move around, and she's got all different kinds. But that's a love and a time, hand collecting. She has a couple thousand, but we only have 250,000, and I say only very lightly, because most people, like when I'm having conversations at like local food conversations, like we're too large to be considered local, or I guess that's like the best way to put it. Like if I said, oh, we have eggs, I'd love to sell them at your store. And they ask, how many chickens do you have? And you say 250,000. And it's like, wah, 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 like, and in the grand scheme of things, our friends to the west here in New York, they have over 1 million birds. Our friends to the north, they've got 2 million. There's only a couple of small farms of our size in New York, out in Albany, and then down in Sullivan County. And, we've started working with like the Amish and Mennonite communities who have free range chickens, but access to like egg cartons and packaging is too expensive for them. And so if they buy through a larger supplier, it helps, even with their costs. And so you start to create these networks.
And so when people think about things like free range eggs, what do you think they're imagining relative to the way that it actually is?
So I think they're thinking that like they're out year round and they're, scratching in the dirt. But what they don't realize is that they're eating bugs and different things. And, if we crack open an egg, it might have like a worm in it or different things that you're not used to seeing in your store-bought conventional eggs. And that's one thing where like we've sent people down the road to a roadside stand and they call up and say, I went there, but, there was something in my egg or different things, but, they're not candling their eggs. They're not using a blood detector or those different things that you would have from an operation that's USDA inspected.
So one of the things that's been really interesting to me as you and I have gotten to know each other is that you went down the path of being an environmental science person. You had studied that in school. And I think most people, when they imagine somebody in environmental science, you must have been an outlier to come from a farm with 250,000 chickens laying eggs.
Oh, yeah. That was definitely like on campus. At first, I would kind of stay quiet about like my agricultural background because I had a lot of, classmates that were either vegans or vegetarians. And at that time, I didn't know how to have like positive, just conversations to like understand their standpoint and for them to hear my standpoint. And then I definitely remember like it was my junior year and someone said something and my hand went straight up and the whole class was shocked because is at a small environmental school, that was the same size as my high school that I went to, then that includes like from freshman year to PhD students. So I had been with a small core group of people for years and they didn't know I had an ag background. And it was about chicken manure. We were talking about manure storage, CAFOs and different things like that. And I was able to actually say like, this is why we are environmentally friendly. This is why we care about the land. This is why we care about clean water. Our animals need clean water, just like you and I need clean water. You don't want to drink dirty water. I don't want them drinking dirty water. We have a wastewater treatment plant on site where we treat all of our egg wash water. We could have had a lagoon and then let those things settle out. And then the water off the top would be, let out eventually. But we didn't want a lagoon. Those are stinky. They're not, they don't make good neighbors. And, a lot of people say not in my backyard. So we have a wastewater treatment plant that allows us to clean the water. We could use it to like wash our trucks or different things if we wanted to like reduce, reuse, recycle. So with my ag background, meeting my environmental background, and you've talked about it before too, like with sustainability, like it's a fun word, but like, what does it actually mean? Like if you're just checking a box or writing a plan. And I think that with the regulations and the things that we deal with on a regular basis, it's just harder to keep, like now we have regenerative ag and all these different things, and we're all trying to do the same thing, feed the world. And I think that if we all understood each other a little bit more, instead of trying to divide each other or say like my product's better, like I don't have free range eggs, but I will gladly tell you where to find them if that's what you prefer to buy. But if you want to buy our eggs, I can tell you a list of stores locally. Or if you're looking, we get a lot of calls for quail eggs. Like that's one thing that's monthly. Someone's calling for quail or duck eggs. That really changed throughout COVID. And I think people are just becoming more aware of where their food comes from and those processes. But it's just, I don't know, like I want to be part of the conversation, and sometimes it's knowing when to step up and sometimes it's knowing when to shut up. But I think that we'll have to be better advocates for ourselves going forward. We can't just sit back and let someone else say, this is how it's done, because if they're not hearing the correct information on how it's done, your story will be told negatively.
Yeah, and like I think that one of the reasons that a young person in college can be so caught up in the aughts is those are the easiest stories to understand, right? They're the easiest one for somebody to come along and say, this is the way you think reality is, but I'm going to show you where the conflict of that reality actually runs into some other challenge, and let me show you how dark it is. And by you knowing and believing this other thing, you're a part of a special group. You're a part of a group of people that holds a special truth. So take that truth and move it out into the world. And the challenge that ag runs into is if you are the traditional and the mainstream, your conflict stories are things you have already overcome, right? There were times when eggs weren't candled, or there were times when you didn't know how to wash things, or you didn't have certain protocols that you as a farmer implement now because you just didn't know, or you just weren't doing things on the scale that they're at. But those stories are really hard to make compelling to a young person that thinks the way that I'll make the biggest difference in the world, the way that I'll transcend my luxury position, is that I'll fight for some future, but they genuinely don't know what's going on in the wider world. They're just trying their best to advocate for something they believe that's bigger than themselves.
Yeah, and so like I could produce cage-free eggs, but I need a market and a customer that's willing to pay top dollar for those added costs behind the scenes. Like we could do it. We could build the barns. We could hire the extra employees and but at the grocery store, when you're making that choice between a dozen eggs that's $4, maybe even $8, or $1.50, which dozen will you ultimately buy at the end of the day?
Yeah, and I mean, like, I run into a problem because I know what stories are sticky, right? Like, I know just from practice, just from being around it. So my wife and I, when I was telling her about free-range eggs one time, I remember citing that, they're open to predator birds that can fly around, and you've got these chickens that have been bred for many, many years. They're totally defenseless, and now they're being hauled off by eagles that are coming down. And so to my wife, she's like, oh my God, I don't want to support, chickens that are being hauled off by eagles. Like, this is terrible, right? So now she wants to buy the cheaper eggs. But then if I actually take a step back and say, well, there are benefits and there are reasons to doing this and there are reasons for doing that, but that's not the way our human mind works. The way we work is we need a story that gives meaning to the decisions that we're making. And I find your quest to be able to explain things to legislatures and like always calling people up and working with these different groups to be one that I'm really interested in helping out with, because you have a tall hill to climb, because unless you want to shoot at the other side, it is very difficult to make sticky stories.
And we've actually found a unique ally throughout this whole process and in building relationships with urban legislators. And that's with the live markets down in New York City. There's some legislation to ban those live markets. And there are so many
Wait, what are live markets? Like, there are places where you can bring your chickens and just be like hanging out.
So yeah, you would be able to go buy like a live chicken, a live animal, and you would butcher it yourself, maybe for your religious practices or different things, your cultural background. And so having access to these live markets is a real big deal down in New York City. And so these urban legislators are like, whoa, you can't do this. And it's like, now you understand our side. Like, they're calling New York Farm Bureau and saying, like, how can I help my constituents with this issue? And so now, we're building those relationships, and we'll say, we'll help you with the live markets, but you've got to help us with labor or cage free, or, get the word out that farm workers are essential and they need these COVID vaccines. So they're starting to understand a little bit more of how or where their food comes from. And it's an opportunity. And so to keep nurturing these relationships
Yeah, and it's a weird thing, right? Like in our culture, I remember one time a farmer up in either South Dakota or Minnesota saying there's this huge Muslim population around St. Paul, Minneapolis. And around the springtime, they have a tradition of slaughtering a goat. Well, like they've got to go find a place that is willing to raise goats for them and then be able to slaughter it and handle all the entrails and the blood and doing it in their own halal way. And that like you find two completely different theologies, right? Christians and Muslims bonding together over, we need to be able to have the freedom to do this. We need to be able to have the markets where we can come in and share. And it's funny because those are two groups of somewhere people that are separated by entire religions, but it's the anywhere people, the people that are living in the city that say, well, you know, safety first, or, oh, you know, you shouldn't have these traditions and therefore we shouldn't have it. And so it does make for strange bedfellows.
Yeah, definitely. But it's great to be able to have these conversations that, you know, helps everyone with their, you know, the same goals. And
so Easter is coming up, which as when I was a boy, as the middle child of 7, that would be the time that we would buy at a minimum 9 dozen eggs and paint all of them and get them ready. What are things about egg painting or the preparation for this holiday that you as an egg producer know about, but other people wouldn't know?
Well, there's so many different ways that, you know, you can decorate them. Obviously, like you can boil them and then use vinegar and food coloring. Some people, you know, they give their kids stickers and, you know, markers, and they might draw on them. You can use shaving cream and food coloring, and you roll the egg and it creates these nice, like cool swirled patterns. There's just different, like, there's so many different ways that you can, and also like if you have eggs that are different colors, so like a brown egg, when you dye it with food coloring, the colors will come out a little bit different, obviously, than a white egg. Or if you're using like a, you know, green eggs, because chicken eggs can be all these different colors. And so when you start playing with the dyes, it's a lot of fun to see like what you can create. And my mom, you know, we didn't have plastic Easter eggs, but we always hosted Easter, and my mom would tape quarters to the outside of them. So like an egg was worth a quarter. And so you could make some significant money coming to Aunt Patsy's house on Easter.
So I love hard boiling and soft boiling eggs, and I have like gone to the widest edges of the internet trying to find the perfect way to boil eggs. Do you have a special way that you do it so that they come out perfectly every time?
You know, I love to watch those videos too myself. But like the best trick that I found is that you throw like I think it's like a teaspoon of baking soda in with the water. And when you take them out, the shells come off a lot easier. That's like one of the tricks. But an egg that is a little bit older will also peel better. So like this is where the Julian date and understanding what the Julian date is on your egg carton, like today's 076, 76th day of the year. So if I were going to hard boil some eggs, I'd be looking for some eggs that were at least 2 weeks old. Because with the air bubbles inside the egg and the shell, like that membrane, as it gets a little older, that the air, it'll become a little more porous. And so that's why, like, when you have a really fresh egg, it does not peel that well.
So my trick with hard boiling eggs is I actually just put like a quarter of an inch of water in the bottom, and then I put the eggs in, or I turn that up and get it so that it's boiling, and then I put them in there for 6.5 minutes. And then I take it off, and then I pull all the eggs out, and I plunge them in cold water. So that way they both stop boiling. It's like the exact right temperature for like soft-boiled, medium-boiled eggs, and then they peel much better. So this is my tried and true method. I probably eat an absurd amount of eggs, and that started when I was in the Peace Corps. And one of the things that I realized about eggs is that in the US, we refrigerate them because we wash them. But like eggs last a really, really long time if they haven't been washed.
Yeah, they do. You can leave them on your countertop, like they do that in Europe, obviously, other areas of the world. But Americans like their eggs nice and clean, and they don't want to see any manure or egg yolk on them, or even like imperfectly shaped eggs. You get that nice, perfect egg. That's because someone's grated them and candled them and pulled out all those little oddball looking ones. But like occasionally you'll find one that looks like a golf ball or just like other textural things, or like it almost looks like it has a pimple on it because it's like a raised, like, I don't know how to.
So what was the Julian date you were talking about there? I don't know anything at all about that.
Okay, so on the side of your egg carton, there's a best if used by date. There's a Julian date. So obviously, like January 1st is 001. December 31st, if it's not a leap year, is 365. And if it's a leap year, the last day of the year is 366. So by looking at that Julian date, you can figure out when your eggs were processed. And they have to be processed within 36 hours of being laid. They have to be refrigerated by that point. You have up until that. So like you can farm pack them. So like you can get them refrigerated and wash them at a later date. But so on our farm, we run them online. So that means whatever, we didn't have a great day processing yesterday. So we did more eggs yesterday. So today we ran really well. We only stopped once and we were down for 1 minute. So we got out early today, and that's just how it works. But you have to have them washed and refrigerated. So that Julian date, today's 076. So tomorrow will be the 77th day of the year. And then obviously.
Do you always know that just off the top of your head, just from the work that you do?
Yeah. Like I've always thought about getting a tattoo, like with our plant code on it, and my birthday, but it's a Julian date as 052. But it's just kind of one of those weird, quirky things where it wouldn't really mean anything to anyone else, but it would mean something to me.
So you've been a member of the Articulate Ventures Network, and one of the things that you've talked about in there quite persuasively is about management and about like how to get people to cooperate. And, you just mentioned a little bit ago about the line stopping. So talk a little bit about the management, how your farm right now manages workers, and what you've learned over time about getting people to work together in this place where one little mistake means cracked eggs everywhere.
Yeah. So I've been on the family farm now for the past 7 years. And prior to that, like I had helped write training manuals at my alarm monitoring job in data entry. And I had helped train people at the golf course to work in the hut where we, grilled hamburgers and hot dogs and sold beverages. And you're like, how does that translate to what you do on a daily basis? Well, obviously, my team of 10 in the egg processing room, I have like 10 spots on the average day that I need someone in each of those spots. And over time, I've thought, like, how can I look outside the box to fill those spots? And so right now I have a really fantastic team. And 3 of those employees are retired workers who still, want to socialize and do something a couple days a week. And they have become real assets to our company. We love having them there on the days that they're there, but they also bring a wealth of knowledge from the backgrounds that they've worked in. So if it's coming from the Postal Service for 33 years and you're running at the beer factory, Budweiser, I'm able to say, hey, when dates are on the beer cans or the beer boxes, what would you do? Like, because obviously there are days when the eggs don't get the dates on the carton, and that's a real problem because we have to take them all out and stamp them by hand, and that takes time. And so having that ability to pick someone else's brain on on, like how things were done where you worked, because it's translates to what I'm doing. And then there was things that we've learned by trial and error, but like preventative maintenance, making sure that the machine is clean, well oiled. It has its sweet spot. Like if you're running the machine at 205 cases an hour, or 215, like it'll like just run well. But like anything like above that, or even if you slow it down too slow, like things start to malfunction. It just has the speed that it likes to run at. So those are some things that I've learned. You learn what motivates people. Like everyone has a different reason for showing up to work. Some people just want that paycheck. Some people want to learn skills so that as an entry-level job, they can learn those skills and then go on to work somewhere else. And one of my favorite stories is I had a guy who worked for me when I first started, and he left to take another job. And throughout COVID, he came back. And he knocked on the door and he said, "Hey, Christina, I'm doing construction now, and I own a food truck, and I need eggs for my breakfast sandwiches. And so I thought of what better place to come than straight to the farm." And we typically don't do store or like on farm pickups, but to have Kelvin walk through the door and bring a friend with him and say, "This is where I started. This is where this is my first real job. And I learned how to show up. And then now look at me." And that is like that, like you can see it on my face right now. Like it just brings me joy. Like it's exciting to see people grow and develop. And then, most of the time it's a part-time egg packaging job. So obviously if you need a full-time job, like I would love to be able to write you that recommendation letter, or, send you off to college, or even when you're done with a semester, have you back. And so like, that's one thing that I have right now. I've got some high schoolers that can cover breaks for when like my full-time employees want to spend time either with their kids or travel. If it's over a school break, I've got a list of 4 high schoolers I can pick from now. Or my college student that can come in on a Thursday because she doesn't have class on Thursdays and she'll be there every Saturday. And so but then as soon as the semester ends, she wants to come back, and work. And so I've learned that like, oh, that's great. You can go take your summer landscaping job and get all the hours in the world. And I know that when the snow starts to fall in Syracuse, that you're going to be calling me up and saying, I'm able to start this date. So you kind of start doing these swaps. And at first, that really stressed my dad out. And now with our efficiency being up and we have this real like team environment and things are running well, he's like, "Wow, you're really onto something." And so
yeah, your enthusiasm about making your workplace someplace that people want to be is definitely contagious in the network. And you can see that, my father-in-law is fond of saying like the measure of a man is how much do people want to work for him? Like how much do people want to come back? And money will only take you so far. So your ability to capture whatever it is that motivates them and make them feel excited, that to have anybody ever come back ever after they've worked for you to say, "This is where I started," seems to me to be the mark of excellence, right? The mark of doing something right and being on a path upwards.
Yeah. And I definitely learned, like, there's definitely, I had days that I wasn't, that smiley, bubbly, like, constructive boss, but I've learned from that. And as I've taken on other leadership roles, it's helped me grow as a person, or like even just spending time in the network, like work, doing the work to take it to the next level. And then I hopefully will be accepted into Lead New York here in the fall at Cornell University. And like it's a similar program to what Caleb's, he got pushed back for COVID, but it's just a leadership course for 2 years.
So as we wrap up, I'm going to put you on the spot, but I feel like I can do it because you are one of the most active members of the Articulate Ventures Network. You've like pushed me to make things better, to do things in different and unique ways. What is your best pitch for why people should join AVN? What have you gotten out of it, and why do you think it's a worthwhile thing to spend time on?
This is the one question I was hoping you were going to ask me today that we would like get to. So I think that if you care about the community that you live in, and that you want to be a better somewhere person, AVN is a place to make that happen, because we're working on so many things, not just like public speaking or communications, like with our monthly shared experiences, like learning not to hit the snooze button, or becoming better writers. Or even having game night. Like now there's a string of us that are communicating on Snapchat, sharing like our operations or our day-to-day, like Nicholas with GoPo. So like we're learning more about popcorn. And it's just like in a time where community was lacking, or you didn't have access to like the typical friendships that you would have had, like AVN really has become something like way bigger than like what like I had anticipated when I first signed up, because I was involved with the book clubs, and I still enjoy those book clubs, but like it's like build your own adventure. Like you can make it like your participation can be as like gung-ho as you want, or you can just read post and kind of like work on things in the background. Like you don't have to be that person that's involved 7 days a week, but if you want to check in once a week, you're still able to keep up with the content or do things at your own pace, or chime in when you want to. And I think that there's a room for anyone, even with movie nights, like that Sunday night once a month, like with the same people. It's been a lot of fun, and they're not just one type of movie. We're all over the map. So.
Well, I mean, this makes my heart sing to hear you describe this being like, if you want to be a somewhere person, this is a really great place to learn the skills that lets you build your community. Man, that's music to my ears. Well, Christina Hudson Kohler, this was a blast talking to you. I'm sorry that we had to come on under kind of tense circumstances. If people wanted to help you make a difference with getting vaccines to the workers that showed up every day, making sure that people throughout the state of New York had food, what could they do?
They could go online to our New York Farm Bureau website, and under our e-lobbying, you could just write a letter, and it's just a couple, quick type it in and hit send, and the legislators of New York will hear your voice. And you do not need to be a member of New York Farm Bureau to do that. E-lobbying is open to anyone.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'll see you in the speaking gym in just a little while.
Great. Thanks.